Don't let them see you helping me. The stranger's voice came low and strained from the darkness behind the alley dumpster, rough like gravel dragged across concrete, and Amara Brooks froze with one hand still wrapped around the trash bag she had just carried out of her grandmother's pharmacy. Rain hammered the narrow Busan alley in silver sheets, dripping from rusted fire escapes and flickering neon signs above the empty street, while somewhere in the distance, tires screeched hard enough to make her pulse jump. She should have walked away. Every instinct told her to keep moving, lock the back door, and pretend she had never heard him. But then lightning cracked across the sky for half a second, and she saw the blood soaking through the man's white dress shirt. Her breath caught. He looked expensive, even half collapsed against the brick wall. Black wool coat. Polished shoes splashed with rainwater. A watch gleaming faintly beneath trembling fingers. But it was his eyes that unsettled her most. Cold. Focused. Alert in a way injured people weren't supposed to be. Like even wounded, he was still calculating every exit around him. Please, Amara whispered, glancing toward the empty street. You need a hospital. No hospitals. His answer came instantly. Too instantly. Then she heard it. Car doors slamming somewhere nearby. Male voices. Fast footsteps splashing through puddles. The stranger grabbed her wrist before she could step away, not hard enough to hurt, but enough to stop her breathing for one terrifying second. 4 men, he murmured. Armed. If they see you with me, you become part of this. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She should run. God, she should run. Amara worked double shifts at St. Mary's Urgent Care to stay far away from trouble like this. Trouble was what took her younger brother 3 years ago when a street shooting turned the wrong corner into the wrong place at the wrong time. Since then, she had promised herself one thing. Stay invisible. Stay alive. But the man against the wall suddenly coughed hard, pain flashing across his face before he forced it away again, and something inside her cracked. He looked dangerous. The kind of dangerous people crossed the street to avoid. Yet underneath the rain and blood and sharp edges, she saw exhaustion. Real exhaustion. The kind that made monsters look human for 1 second too long. Headlights swept across the mouth of the alley. Voices grew closer. Check behind the buildings, someone shouted in Korean. Amara made her choice before her brain could stop her. Can you walk? She whispered. The man studied her silently, suspicious even now. Then slowly, he nodded once. She grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the pharmacy's rusted side entrance just as black SUVs rolled past the alley opening. Her hand shook violently while she unlocked the door. If this gets me killed, she muttered under her breath, dragging him inside the dark storage room, I'm going to regret it. But the stranger didn't answer. He only paused beneath the flickering fluorescent light, rain dripping from dark hair onto the floor tiles, and looked at her with an expression that made her stomach tighten. Not gratitude. Not relief. Recognition. Like for the first time that night, Kong Min-jae had found something far more dangerous than the men hunting him. Someone kind enough to save him. The storage room smelled like rubbing alcohol, wet cardboard, and old dust trapped inside cracked ceiling vents that had not worked properly in years. Amara slammed the metal door shut behind them and locked it fast, her chest rising hard while rain battered the alley outside. For a moment neither of them spoke. The stranger stood perfectly still beneath the flickering fluorescent light, one hand pressed against his side while water dripped steadily from his black coat onto the tile floor. Most injured people looked smaller when they were hurt. Fragile. Human. This man somehow looked more dangerous. Amara swallowed hard and forced herself to move first. Sit down, she said quietly, pointing toward an old pharmacy chair near the shelves. He did not move. His dark eyes swept across the room instead. Exit door. Security camera. Medical cabinet. Even injured, he noticed everything. You always analyze rooms before bleeding on the floor, she muttered nervously. That almost sounded like a joke. But the man did not smile. You should not have brought me here. His English was smooth, low, controlled. Educated. Expensive somehow. Yeah, well, Amara replied while pulling open a supply drawer with shaking hands, you should probably stop talking before you pass out. She grabbed gauze, antiseptic spray, scissors, and the emergency trauma kit she kept hidden for after-hours clinic accidents. Her grandmother would kill her if she knew she was using medical supplies on some mysterious stranger in the middle of the night. But as Amara turned back toward him, her stomach tightened again. He was still standing, watching her. What? She asked carefully. Why help me? The question came too fast. Too sharp. Not curiosity. Suspicion. Like kindness itself confused him. Amara paused. Rain rattled softly against the small basement window above them. Because you were hurt, she answered finally. That used to be enough for people. Something unreadable flickered across his face before disappearing instantly behind that cold expression again. Then slowly, he sat down. Even exhausted, he carried himself like a man used to being obeyed. Amara crouched beside him carefully and reached for his coat. The second her fingers touched the fabric, his hand caught her wrist. Fast. Precise. Her pulse jumped painfully. Easy, she whispered, trying not to panic. If I wanted to hurt you, I would have left you outside. His grip loosened after a second, though his eyes never softened. Amara gently peeled back the soaked coat and sucked in a quiet breath. The injury along his side looked painful, but manageable. Thank God. She had seen worse during overnight emergency rotations. You are lucky, she murmured while disinfecting the area. Another inch and this becomes a very different night. He watched her the entire time. Not like a patient watching a nurse. Like a man studying whether someone was lying to him. What is your name? He asked. Amara. Amara. The way he repeated it sounded careful, like he was memorizing something important. And you? She asked. Silence. Then finally, Min-jae. No last name? Of course not. Amara rolled her eyes slightly while applying clean bandages. You mysterious rich guys really love being dramatic. To her surprise, something almost invisible shifted near the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. More like he had forgotten how. Then suddenly headlights swept across the basement window. Both of them froze. Tires crunched outside the alley. Doors opened. Male voices echoed closer this time. One voice shouted sharply in Korean. Another answered immediately. Amara felt fear crawl slowly up her spine as Min-jae rose to his feet despite the pain, every trace of weakness gone from his posture. Predator again. Cold again. Dangerous again. Then came 3 slow knocks against the pharmacy's back door upstairs. The second knock came harder than the first. Slow. Controlled. The kind of knock from someone who already knew you were inside. Amara felt all the warmth drain from her body while the old pharmacy seemed to shrink around them. Upstairs, rainwater tapped softly against the front windows facing the empty street, but down in the basement, the silence turned sharp enough to cut through skin. Min-jae stepped away from the chair in one smooth motion, ignoring the fresh bandages beneath his shirt as if pain no longer existed. His expression changed completely. Whatever exhaustion she had seen earlier disappeared behind something colder. Older. Dangerous in a way that made her suddenly understand why men with weapons were searching the city for him. Another voice called from outside the back entrance, calm but firm. Chairman Kong. Amara blinked. Chairman? Her eyes shifted toward Min-jae instantly, but he did not look at her. He only kept staring toward the basement stairs leading upstairs, calculating. Listening. Your people? She whispered. He answered after a long pause. Maybe. That word tightened every muscle in her chest. Maybe was not comforting. Maybe meant uncertainty. Betrayal. Trouble. Another knock echoed through the pharmacy. "We know you are inside," the same voice called in Korean accented English. "Please open the door." Amara looked toward the staircase, then back at Min-jae. "You should tell me what is happening." "The less you know," he replied quietly, "the safer you are." She almost laughed from disbelief. Safer? A bleeding stranger had appeared behind her pharmacy while armed men searched the streets outside. Safe had already left hours ago. "You dragged me into this the second you grabbed my wrist in that alley," she whispered sharply. For the first time since she met him, Min-jae looked genuinely affected by something she said. Not angry. Not defensive. Just still. Then suddenly his head tilted slightly, eyes narrowing toward the ceiling. Footsteps. Multiple pairs. Someone was circling toward the front of the building now. Amara's pulse jumped. "How many people are out there?" she asked. "Too many." His answer came instantly. Before she could speak again, Min-jae moved closer and lowered his voice. "Listen carefully. If they are not my men, you stay behind me and do not speak." "Behind you," she repeated incredulously. "You can barely stand." A strange flicker crossed his eyes then. Almost amusement. "I can stand long enough." The confidence in his voice unsettled her more than fear would have. Upstairs, the old pharmacy bell suddenly rattled as someone opened the front door. Amara froze. The store was supposed to be closed. Heavy footsteps crossed the wooden floor above them. One pair. Then another. Slow. Patient. Searching. Min-jae's posture sharpened instantly, every muscle alert despite the injury along his side. He reached into his coat carefully, and Amara's breath caught before she realized he was only removing a small black phone. The screen flashed repeatedly with missed calls written entirely in Korean. Whoever this man was, powerful people were desperately trying to find him tonight. Then the basement light flickered once. Twice. A shadow moved beneath the gap at the bottom of the basement door upstairs. Someone had found the staircase. Amara instinctively stepped backward until her shoulders touched the metal shelves lined with medicine bottles. The storage room suddenly felt too small to breathe inside. The footsteps stopped directly above them. Silence followed. Thick and unnatural. Then a deep male voice spoke from the other side of the basement door. "Chairman Kong," he said carefully. "Please tell us you are alive." Amara looked toward Min-jae again, expecting relief. Instead, his face became even colder. And that terrified her more than anything else had tonight. The basement remained completely silent after the voice outside spoke his name. Even the rain seemed quieter now, muffled beneath the crushing tension filling the tiny storage room. Amara stared at Min-jae, waiting for some sign of relief, but his expression only hardened further beneath the pale fluorescent light. That frightened her more than the men outside ever could. Because if a man like him feared betrayal, then whoever stood beyond that basement door had the power to destroy him. Another voice joined the first upstairs. Lower. Nervous. "Sir, we secured the alley." Min-jae's jaw tightened slightly at those words. Tiny reaction. Barely visible. But Amara noticed. "You do not trust them," she whispered. He looked at her then, and for the first time since she dragged him into the pharmacy, the coldness in his eyes shifted into something dangerously honest. "Trust gets people buried." The bluntness of the answer settled heavily between them. Upstairs, floorboards creaked slowly above the basement ceiling. Someone was moving closer to the stairwell. Amara's pulse hammered painfully in her throat while Min-jae stepped toward the bottom of the stairs, posture straight despite the injury beneath his dark shirt. It was strange watching him now that she knew part of the truth. Everything made sense suddenly. The expensive watch. The men searching the city. The unnatural calm. Even hurt, he carried himself like someone the world moved around. Not a businessman. Not some random victim from the alley. Power clung to him quietly, like smoke after a fire. Chairman Kong, the voice called again from upstairs, more urgently now. Please answer. Min-jae remained silent for 3 long seconds that felt like forever. Then finally, he spoke in Korean. Calm. Controlled. Sharp enough to freeze the air itself. The response upstairs came immediately, but Amara could not understand the words. She only heard the sudden shift in tone. Respect. Fear. Relief. Then footsteps retreated slightly from the basement door. Min-jae exhaled slowly for the first time all night. Not relaxed. Just calculating again. Amara crossed her arms tightly, trying to steady herself. Okay, she said quietly. I think I deserve some answers now. He glanced toward her without speaking. You are not some regular guy, are you? Silence. You already know the answer. The truth of it sent unease crawling down her spine. She had spent years avoiding men tied to gangs, crime, and violence after losing her brother. And now one stood barely 6 feet away from her inside her grandmother's pharmacy basement, looking like he belonged on the front page of every nightmare she had tried to outrun. Chairman, one of the men upstairs said carefully in English this time, we need to move you. The district is no longer secure. Min-jae ignored him completely. His attention stayed on Amara instead. When they come downstairs, he said quietly, stay behind me. You keep saying that like it is supposed to make me feel better. To her surprise, something softer flickered briefly across his face again. Exhaustion maybe. Or guilt. It should. Before she could respond, the basement door upstairs finally opened with a slow creak. Heavy footsteps descended carefully 1 step at a time. Amara instinctively backed away while Min-jae remained perfectly still at the bottom of the stairs. Then 3 men appeared beneath the dim light. Black suits. Rain-soaked shoulders. Earpieces. One of them looked no older than 30, but the second his eyes landed on Min-jae, he bowed deeply without hesitation. The other 2 followed instantly. Chairman Kong, the younger man said, visibly shaken. Thank God you are alive. Amara looked from the armed men to Min-jae and suddenly realized something terrifying. These were not bodyguards protecting a dangerous man. They were terrified of disappointing him. The 3 men remained bowed for several seconds before Min-jae finally spoke. Who followed you here? His voice came calm and quiet, but the effect on the room was immediate. The youngest man straightened carefully, rain still dripping from his dark suit onto the basement stairs. No one followed us, Chairman. We secured the perimeter. Ourselves. Min-jae's eyes narrowed slightly. You took 19 minutes. The younger man lowered his head again instantly. We accept responsibility. Amara stared at the exchange in disbelief. Nobody argued with him. Nobody defended themselves. These men looked at Min-jae the way soldiers looked at a commander during wartime. Careful. Disciplined. Slightly afraid. One of the guards finally noticed the medical supplies scattered across the storage table beside Amara. His gaze shifted to the fresh bandages beneath Min-jae's shirt, then toward her. Surprise flashed briefly across his face. She treated you, he asked carefully. Before Amara could answer, Min-jae spoke first. She saved my life. The room fell completely silent after those words. Even the rain outside seemed distant now. The 3 guards looked toward Amara differently after that. Not with suspicion anymore. Something closer to stunned respect. And that made her deeply uncomfortable. Okay, she said slowly, folding her arms tighter. Somebody needs to explain why armed men keep showing up at my grandmother's pharmacy in the middle of the night. None of them answered immediately. The youngest guard glanced nervously toward Min-jae first, clearly waiting for permission to speak. That alone told her everything about the hierarchy in this room. Finally Min-jae stepped toward the old pharmacy sink and washed blood from his hands in silence while the fluorescent light flickered softly above him. He looked strangely composed now despite everything that had happened. Like chaos followed him so often that he had learned to breathe inside it. "You should not have become involved in this," he said quietly without looking at her. Amara almost laughed. "You keep saying that after dragging danger into my basement." One of the guards stiffened slightly at her tone, clearly shocked anyone would speak to their chairman that way. But Min-jae only dried his hands slowly with a paper towel. "Most people would have left me in that alley." His words carried no self-pity. Just fact. Amara looked at him carefully then. Under the harsh basement lights, he suddenly looked older than before. Not physically. Emotionally. Like exhaustion had settled into his bones years ago and never left. "Maybe most people are tired," she replied softly. "Tired of helping strangers who bring trouble with them." For the first time, Min-jae actually looked directly at her for more than a few seconds. Something unreadable moved behind his dark eyes again. Then one of the guards stepped forward urgently. "Chairman, we need to leave now. The Eastern District is compromised. Director Cho has already moved men toward the harbor." The second that name was spoken, the entire atmosphere around Min-jae changed. Tiny shift. Barely visible. But dangerous. "Cho knows where I was attacked," he asked quietly. "We are not certain." "That means yes." Nobody spoke after that. Amara watched the silence carefully and realized something terrifying. The men hunting Min-jae tonight were not random enemies. Someone inside his own organization had betrayed him. Suddenly one of the guards turned sharply toward her. "Chairman," he said carefully, "the girl saw your face. She heard your name." The room instantly became colder. Amara's stomach tightened painfully while all three guards looked toward Min-jae waiting for instructions. Waiting for judgment. Waiting to see whether she had become a problem that needed to disappear. But Min-jae did not even hesitate. "She is under my protection now." The words landed heavily inside the basement. Final. Absolute. One of the guards immediately lowered his eyes. Another nodded once without question. And Amara realized with growing unease that whatever kind of man Kong Min-jae truly was, his word inside this world sounded dangerously close to law. The words "under my protection" lingered inside the basement long after Min-jae said them. Amara felt them settle into the room like a locked door closing somewhere far away. Nobody questioned him. Nobody even looked surprised. The three guards simply accepted it with silent nods, and somehow that frightened her more than shouting ever could. Men this discipline did not follow ordinary people. Rain continued tapping softly against the narrow basement window while the old fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting pale shadows across. Shelves lined with dusty medicine bottles. One of the guards finally stepped forward carefully. "Chairman, the vehicles are ready." Min-jae gave a short nod but did not move toward the stairs. Instead, he looked at Amara again with that same unreadable expression that made her uneasy. Calm. Controlled. Exhausted somewhere underneath. "You cannot stay here tonight," he said quietly. "Excuse me?" Amara crossed her arms immediately. "I absolutely can." No, the single word came soft, but absolute. "If Cho has compromised my organization, there is a chance this pharmacy is already being watched." The thought made cold panic spread slowly through her chest. This place was all she had left of her grandmother. The tiny pharmacy near the harbor had survived typhoons, debt, and neighborhood gangs because her grandmother refused to abandon it. Every shelf downstairs still smelled faintly like peppermint oil and old books because of her. "You are bringing danger into my life like it is normal," Amara whispered. Something shifted in Min-jae's face then. Not anger. Regret. Real regret. "For me, it is normal." The honesty of that answer hit harder than she expected. Upstairs, thunder rolled softly across the city while one of the guards answered a phone call in quick Korean whispers near the stairwell. The second he hung up, tension sharpened visibly across his face. "Chairman," he said carefully, "Director Cho is requesting confirmation of your condition." Silence. Heavy silence. Min-jae stared toward the floor for a long moment before speaking. And how did Cho know I survived? Nobody answered. They did not need to. Amara could almost feel the betrayal moving through the room like smoke. Whoever Director Cho was, he should not have known Min-jae escaped the attack tonight. Which meant one terrifying thing. Someone close enough to protect him had also tried to destroy him. Min-jae finally grabbed his black coat from the chair and slipped it on slowly despite the fresh bandages beneath his shirt. His movements remained controlled, but Amara noticed the slight tension in his breathing now. He was pushing through pain without acknowledging it. You should rest, she said. Automatically before she could stop herself. All four men looked toward her instantly. The guard seemed genuinely stunned she would speak to him that way. But Min-jae only adjusted his cuff calmly. Rest comes after survival. The quietness of his voice somehow made the words sadder. One of the guards approached Amara respectfully this time. Miss Brooks, he said carefully, please gather what you need for tonight. We will escort you somewhere secure. I am not going anywhere with armed strangers. You already did, Min-jae replied softly. Amara opened her mouth to argue again, but stopped. Because he was right. The moment she dragged him into the pharmacy, her normal life ended. She hated how true that felt. Min-jae stepped closer then, close enough for her to notice the exhaustion behind his eyes again. Not weakness. Just the weight of someone who had not trusted the world in a very long time. You showed kindness to a man you did not know, he said quietly. That decision has consequences now. Before she could answer, headlights suddenly flooded through the basement window from outside the alley. Too many lights. Too many engines. One of the guards immediately reached toward his earpiece. Another moved toward the stairs. Then a tense voice crackled through the basement silence. Chairman, the guard whispered carefully, more vehicles just arrived. The basement seemed to tighten around all of them after the guard spoke. More vehicles. More people. More danger creeping into the alley outside the pharmacy. Amara could hear engines idling now beneath the sound of rain, deep and expensive, nothing like the rusted delivery trucks that usually passed through this neighborhood after midnight. The guards immediately shifted positions without another word. One moved toward the stairs. Another stepped beside the basement window, watching the reflections of headlights cut through the rain outside. But Min-jae remained completely still in the center of the room, his expression unreadable beneath the pale fluorescent light. That silence of his unsettled Amara more every minute. It was the silence of a man who never panicked because he had already survived worse things than fear. How many? Min-jae asked quietly. At least 12 vehicles, the younger guard answered. Black sedans and 2 armored units. Amara stared at him. Armored units? Nobody explained. One of the guards spoke urgently into his earpiece in Korean while another carefully checked the stairwell leading upstairs. Their movements were disciplined and fast, but not chaotic. They had done this before. Protected him before. Escaped danger before. That realization settled heavily in Amara's stomach. Whatever world Kong Min-jae belonged to, survival was routine there. Then suddenly the guard near the basement window straightened sharply. Chairman, he said carefully, they are forming a perimeter. The room fell silent again. Min-jae finally walked toward the small window and looked outside through the rain-covered glass. Amara moved closer instinctively before stopping herself. She should have stayed far away from him. Far away from all of this. But curiosity pulled harder than fear now. Through the blurred basement window, she could barely make out dark figures standing beside long black vehicles lining both sides of the alley. Men in black suits. Umbrellas held steady in the rain. Motionless. Waiting. It looked less like protection and more like an army gathering around a king. Those are your men, she whispered. Some of them. The answer sent another chill through her chest. Before she could ask more, the basement stairs creaked again. A new figure descended slowly into the room, older than the others, maybe late 50s, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal coat despite the storm outside. Silver streaks touched his dark hair, and unlike the younger guards, he carried himself with unsettling calm. The second he reached the basement floor, every guard immediately lowered their heads respectfully. Even the air seemed to shift around him. The older man's eyes moved directly to Min-jae first. "Chairman," he said quietly, bowing deeply. "We searched half the city." Min-jae did not return the greeting. "And yet Cho found me first." The older man's expression tightened almost invisibly. "We are handling the situation." "No," Min-jae replied softly. "You failed to handle it." The basement went silent again. Amara felt the weight of those words instantly. Nobody argued with him. Nobody defended themselves. The older man accepted the criticism with lowered eyes like judgment from a ruler he could not question. Then his attention shifted toward Amara for the first time. Calm eyes studied her carefully. Not rude. Not threatening. But assessing. "This is the woman?" he asked. "Her name is Amara Brooks," Min-jae answered before anyone else could speak. "She saved my life tonight." The older man looked genuinely surprised by that. His gaze softened slightly as he bowed his head politely toward her. "Then you have done something very few people in this city ever could." Amara swallowed hard. "I did not know who he was." A strange silence followed those words. Then the older man gave a faint, almost sad smile. "Miss Brooks," he said quietly, "that is precisely why you were able to help him." Amara could not stop staring at Min-jae after the older man spoke. The basement suddenly felt unreal, like she had stepped inside one of the crime documentaries late-night television stations played after midnight. Except this was not television. The expensive black vehicles outside were real. The armed men were real. And Kong Min-jae, the quiet stranger she dragged out of the rain, stood in the middle of her grandmother's pharmacy like someone powerful enough to bend the city around him. Thunder rolled softly over Busan while the older man removed his wet gloves with slow precision. "The chairman should leave immediately," he said calmly. "Cho's people are already monitoring the harbor district." Min-jae remained near the basement window, watching the reflections of headlights outside. "And the police?" "Bought." The answer came without hesitation. Amara felt her stomach tighten again. The older man finally introduced himself with a polite bow. "My name is Han Jisu. I oversee internal operations for Chairman Kong." Internal operations. The phrase sounded too clean for something that clearly involved danger. Amara folded her arms tighter around herself. "You all keep talking like this is normal." Han gave her a faint, tired smile. "For us, Miss Brooks, unfortunately it is." She looked toward Min-jae again. He still had not denied any of it. Not the power. Not the criminal connections. Not the fact that half the city apparently feared him. Something sharp twisted painfully inside her chest because suddenly her brother's face flashed through her mind again. Marcus laughing in the kitchen 3 summers ago before everything changed. Marcus promising her he would stay out of trouble. Marcus lying. She remembered the phone call at 2 in the morning. The police officer standing beside her apartment door. The words crossfire and gang dispute spoken too gently by strangers who did not understand how completely grief could hollow someone out. Since that night, Amara hated men like Kong Min-jae. Men surrounded by fear and power and violence disguised as business. Men whose decisions destroyed ordinary families while they rode through cities in black cars with armed guards. Her expression must have changed because Min-jae finally looked directly at her again. "What are you thinking?" he asked quietly. The question surprised her. Even more surprising was the fact he sounded genuinely interested in the answer. Amara let out a bitter laugh. "I am thinking that my brother died because powerful men wanted control over neighborhoods they never even lived in." The basement fell silent. None of the guards moved. Han lowered his eyes slightly. But Min-jae remained completely still. "How old was he?" he asked after a long pause. 19. The answer came sharper than she intended. Too young to become part of somebody else's war. Something flickered across Min-jae's face then. Pain. Real pain. Gone almost instantly, but there. My younger brother was 20 when he died, he said quietly. Amara blinked. The confession startled everyone in the room, even Han. Min-jae rarely spoke about personal things. That much was obvious from the silence around them. Rain tapped steadily against the basement window while Min-jae stared somewhere far away now. People like me, he continued softly, always believe we can control the consequences of power. His voice remained calm, but exhaustion sat underneath. Every word. Usually we are wrong. Amara did not know what to say to that. Because for the first time since meeting him, Kang Min-jae no longer sounded like some untouchable figure from the criminal underworld. He sounded tired. Human. Lonely in a way that money and fear could never fix. Then suddenly one of the younger guards rushed down the basement stairs holding a phone tightly. Chairman, he said carefully, breathing hard, Director Cho just entered the eastern compound. Every trace of softness vanished from Min-jae's face instantly. Coldness returned like a door slamming shut. Then Cho believes I am dead already, he said quietly. And somehow, the calmness in his voice terrified Amara more than anger would have. The basement air felt colder after Min-jae spoke Director Cho's name. Not louder. Not chaotic. Just colder. Like everyone in the room understood something dangerous had finally become certain. Betrayal. Han adjusted his gloves slowly, his face calm but tense around the eyes. Chairman, he said carefully, if Cho entered the eastern compound personally, then he is already consolidating support. He is moving too quickly, Min-jae replied. That means he believes there will be no resistance. One of the younger guards swallowed hard before speaking. Some captains are already switching sides. Silence followed immediately after those words. Heavy silence. The kind that carried consequences nobody wanted to say out loud. Amara watched Min-jae closely then. She expected anger. Expected shouting. Maybe fear. Instead, he only stood near the basement window with one hand resting lightly against the shelf beside him, rainwater still dripping slowly from the edge of his black coat onto the floor. Calm. Too calm. How long? He asked quietly. Since the attack? Han answered after a pause. Probably longer. Min-jae nodded once. Like he had already suspected that answer. Amara felt unease tighten inside her chest again. This man trusted almost nobody, yet someone close enough to organize his security had still betrayed him. She suddenly understood why his eyes never relaxed. Why he watched exits. Why kindness confused him. Somewhere along the way, Kang Min-jae had learned that survival mattered more than peace. We should move now, Han urged softly. The chairman cannot remain exposed. But Min-jae did not move. His attention shifted back toward Amara instead. She hated how aware she became whenever he looked directly at her. Those dark eyes carried too much weight inside them. Too many things unsaid. You should leave the city for a few days, he said quietly. Amara stared at him in disbelief. You think I can just disappear because your organization is falling apart? Yes. The bluntness of the answer irritated her instantly. I have a job. Jobs can be replaced. My life cannot. For the first time all night, something almost human touched Min-jae's expression again. Not amusement exactly. Respect maybe. Han watched the exchange silently before stepping closer to Min-jae. Chairman, Miss Brooks may be safer under our protection until this situation stabilizes. Amara shook her head immediately. Absolutely not. The younger guards looked confused by her refusal. Most people would have accepted protection from powerful men like these without hesitation. But they did not know what she knew. Power always came with a cost. Always. You do not understand, she said quietly, looking directly at Min-jae now. Men like you leave damage behind. Maybe not intentionally. Maybe not personally. But people still suffer because of your world. The room remained silent after that. Nobody interrupted her. Min-jae lowered his eyes briefly, and somehow that small movement carried more exhaustion than words ever could. "You think I do not know that?" he asked softly. The question caught her off guard because there was no arrogance in it. No denial. Only honesty. Rain continued tapping against the basement window while headlights outside cast moving shadows across the walls. One of the guards upstairs spoke urgently into his radio again, then descended halfway down the stairs. "Chairman," he called carefully, "more men from Cho's division just entered the district." Han's expression darkened immediately. "They are searching building by building now." Amara's pulse jumped. "Searching for him?" "Searching for anyone loyal to him," Han corrected quietly. The distinction chilled her even more. Min-jae finally stepped away from the window and reached for his coat collar slowly. Every movement remained controlled despite the injury hidden beneath his shirt. "Then we leave now," he said. One of the younger guards nodded quickly. "The convoy is ready." But before anyone could move toward the stairs, the lights inside the basement suddenly flickered once. Twice. Then the entire room went dark. Darkness swallowed the basement so suddenly that Amara stopped breathing for half a second. The buzzing fluorescent light vanished overhead, leaving only the sound of rain outside and the distant hum of engines idling in the alley. One of the guards immediately pulled a flashlight from his coat, but Min-jae's voice cut through the darkness before the beam could switch on. "No lights." Instant silence followed. Even in the dark, everyone obeyed him without hesitation. Amara could barely make out shapes now. The outline of metal shelves. The faint shadow of Min-jae standing near the basement window. Somewhere upstairs, the old pharmacy refrigerator powered down with a soft mechanical click. Then came another sound. Footsteps above them. Slow. Deliberate. Not the guards outside. Someone inside the building. Amara's pulse slammed painfully against her ribs. "Tell me that is one of your men," she whispered. Nobody answered immediately. That silence was enough. The footsteps crossed the pharmacy floor upstairs one careful step at a time. Wood creaked softly overhead. Whoever it was knew exactly how to move quietly. One of the younger guards reached toward his earpiece again before freezing. "Communications are dead," he whispered. Han's expression hardened in the dim light leaking through the basement window. The power cut was intentional. Another footstep sounded directly above the basement stairs now. Amara instinctively backed closer toward the storage shelves, her breathing shallow. She hated how quickly fear dragged old memories back into her chest. Marcus sneaking into her apartment after midnight with bruised knuckles and nervous eyes. Marcus promising her nobody dangerous knew where she lived. Marcus being wrong. Min-jae suddenly stepped in front of her without a word. The movement was smooth and instinctive, placing himself between her and the basement stairs despite the injury beneath his shirt. Amara stared at his silhouette in the darkness, confused by the strange contradiction of him. A man capable of terrifying an entire city standing protectively in front of someone he met only hours ago. Upstairs, the footsteps stopped completely. Silence settled over the building again. Heavy silence. Waiting silence. Then the basement door handle moved slightly. Not forced. Tested. Someone knew they were down here. One of the guards quietly shifted his stance beside the stairs, but Min-jae lifted one hand slightly without turning around. The guard froze immediately. No sudden movements. No panic. Min-jae listened for another few seconds before speaking softly in Korean toward the door upstairs. "Calm. Controlled. Dangerous." A voice answered from the other side. Older. Male. Respectful. Han frowned instantly. "That is Cho's security chief," he murmured quietly. Amara felt her stomach drop. The man outside spoke again through the basement door. "Chairman Kong," he called carefully. Director Cho wishes to confirm your safety personally. The words sounded polite, but something underneath them felt wrong. Cold. Rehearsed. Min-jae remained silent for a long moment before finally replying. If Cho cared about my safety, I would not be standing in darkness tonight. No answer came immediately. Rain hammered harder against the alley outside now while headlights swept briefly across the basement window. Then the voice upstairs spoke one final time. The director says Busan cannot survive two kings. The basement went completely still after that. Even Amara understood what those words meant. This was no misunderstanding inside some business organization. This was a takeover. Quiet. Ruthless. Planned long before tonight. Han lowered his eyes grimly while the younger guards exchanged tense looks in the darkness. But Min-jae did not react at all. His silhouette remained motionless near the bottom of the stairs. Calm enough to terrify everyone else in the room. Then slowly, almost softly, he spoke toward the door upstairs. Cho always mistook patience for weakness. A pause followed. Long enough for Amara to hear her own heartbeat. Then Min-jae turned slightly toward his men. Prepare the cars, he said quietly. Tonight ends before sunrise. And somehow, the certainty in his voice made the darkness around them feel far more dangerous than before. The basement door upstairs never opened again after the voice disappeared. Whoever stood on the other side had already delivered the message they came for. Busan cannot survive two kings. The sentence lingered inside the darkness like smoke after a fire. One by one, flashlights flickered briefly across the basement as the guards prepared to move, careful to keep the beams pointed low. Han spoke quietly into a backup radio while rain hammered against the alley outside harder than before. The storm above the city seemed to grow heavier with every passing minute. Amara stood near the shelves trying to steady her breathing while the world around her shifted faster than she could process. Just hours ago she had been organizing inventory for tomorrow morning deliveries. Now armed men whispered through radios in her grandmother's basement while one of the most feared men in Busan prepared for what sounded dangerously close to war. Min-jae remained unnervingly calm through all of it. He buttoned his black coat slowly over the fresh bandages beneath his shirt, movements precise despite the pain he refused to acknowledge. Then he looked toward Han. How many captains still answer directly to me? Han hesitated. That hesitation alone answered the question before words came. Not enough, he admitted quietly. The younger guards lowered their eyes immediately. Nobody wanted to be the man bringing bad news to Kong Min-jae tonight. But Min-jae only nodded once. Accepting reality without emotion. That composure unsettled Amara more than panic ever could. You already knew this was coming, she said softly before she could stop herself. Every eye in the basement shifted toward her instantly. But Min-jae answered without irritation. I knew Cho was ambitious. His gaze drifted briefly toward the dark basement window. I underestimated how patient he could be. Han stepped closer. Chairman, the Western Casino remains secure. We can regroup there before sunrise. Min-jae shook his head immediately. No, the single word froze everyone again. Cho expects me to retreat toward familiar territory. Then where do we go? One of the guards asked carefully. Min-jae's eyes shifted slowly toward Amara. The room seemed to still around that glance. Nowhere Cho would expect. Amara stared at him in disbelief. Now Min-jae stepped closer calmly. Your apartment. Absolutely not. Cho's men are searching properties connected to me. They will never search yours. Because normal people are supposed to stay far away from whatever this is. Her voice sharpened despite herself. You cannot just decide to hide in my life because your empire is collapsing. Something flickered behind Min-jae's eyes then. Not anger. Weariness. You think I want this near you? The quietness of the question stopped her cold. For the first time all night, he sounded genuinely frustrated with himself rather than anyone else. Han carefully lowered his voice. Miss Brooks, if the chairman is discovered before dawn, the city will turn unstable very quickly. That is not my responsibility. No, Min-jae said softly. It became mine years ago. Silence followed. Heavy silence. Amara looked at him carefully then, trying to understand the contradiction standing in front of her. A man feared by half the city speaking like someone exhausted from carrying something too heavy for too long. Then one of the guards suddenly stiffened beside the basement stairs. Vehicles approaching fast, he whispered urgently. Headlights swept violently across the basement window outside. Not the calm organized movement from earlier. Faster now. Aggressive. More engines. Han immediately looked toward Min-jae. Cho found us. Nobody panicked. Nobody shouted. But the entire room changed instantly. The younger guards moved toward positions near the stairs while Min-jae remained perfectly still in the center of the basement, dark eyes unreadable beneath the faint emergency light. Then slowly, he turned toward Amara. One last time. Stay behind me, he said quietly. And for the first time that night, she realized he was not giving her an order. He was making her a promise. The engines outside grew louder until the entire pharmacy seemed to vibrate around them. Headlights swept violently across the basement window again, turning the dark room into flashes of pale white and shadow. One of the younger guards moved quickly toward the stairs, listening through his earpiece before cursing softly under his breath in Korean. Rear alley blocked, he warned. 2 more vehicles just arrived. Han immediately stepped beside Min-jae. Chairman, we need another exit. But Min-jae did not move. His eyes stayed on the basement stairs while rain pounded against the building overhead like distant drums. Calm. Still calm. Amara could not understand how a man surrounded by betrayal and danger could stand so quietly in the middle of it all. Then she realized something unsettling. Maybe this was the only life Kang Min-jae had ever known. One of the guards pulled open a metal storage cabinet along the basement wall and revealed a narrow service hallway hidden behind stacks of old inventory boxes. Maintenance tunnel, he explained quickly. Leads to the alley behind the seafood market. Han nodded once. Good. But before anyone could move, footsteps thundered across the pharmacy floor upstairs. More than before. Faster now. The sound stopped directly above the basement. Then silence. Heavy silence. Everybody froze instinctively. Amara felt her heartbeat climbing painfully into her throat while Min-jae slowly removed his watch and handed it to Han. If anything happens, he said quietly, the Western accounts transfer to Seoul immediately. Han stared at him. Chairman, that is not a suggestion. The older man lowered his eyes instantly. Even now, with enemies closing in around them, Min-jae's authority never cracked. Suddenly the basement door upstairs opened hard enough to slam against the wall. Voices filled the pharmacy above them. Calm voices. Organized voices. Nobody yelling. Somehow that felt worse. Search downstairs, someone ordered. Amara's breathing caught instantly. One of the younger guards moved toward the stairwell, but Min-jae stopped him with a single glance. No unnecessary escalation, he said quietly. We leave. The hidden hallway door creaked open fully as Han motioned everyone toward it. Amara hesitated only half a second before following them. The narrow maintenance tunnel smelled like concrete, seawater, and rusted pipes untouched for years. Emergency lights flickered faintly overhead while footsteps echoed behind them through the basement above. Min-jae walked directly beside Amara despite the injury beneath his coat, his posture still unnaturally composed. You should not be doing this while hurt, she whispered quietly. You should not have helped me in the alley, he replied. Yet here we are. The strange softness beneath his words caught her off guard again. Then suddenly voices shouted somewhere behind them. Closer now. One of the guards cursed under his breath. They found the tunnel entrance. The group moved faster through the narrow corridor until cold night air finally appeared ahead of them. The exit opened behind the seafood market 2 blocks away from the pharmacy. Rain hit Amara instantly the second they stepped outside, cold and sharp against her skin. Black vehicles lined the alley waiting with headlights glowing through the storm. Men in dark coats stood guard beneath umbrellas, scanning rooftops and intersections with disciplined precision. The second Min-jae appeared, every single man straightened immediately. Not one spoke above a respectful murmur. Fear and loyalty moved through them at the same time. Amara stopped walking for a moment, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of it all. This was not just a criminal organization. This was power woven quietly through an entire city. Then Min-jae looked toward her again. Rainwater slid slowly down the side of his face while distant thunder rolled across Busan behind him. "Come with us until sunrise," he said quietly. "After that, you can decide whether you ever want to see me again." Amara opened her mouth to refuse automatically. But before she could answer, a black sedan suddenly pulled into the alley from the opposite side and stopped hard. The rear door opened slowly. And the man stepping out smiled like someone arriving late to a funeral he had already paid for. Rain poured through the narrow alley in silver waves as every guard around Min-jae instinctively shifted position the second the black sedan stopped. Nobody reached for weapons. Nobody panicked. But the atmosphere changed instantly. Tighter. Sharper. Dangerous in the quietest possible way. The man stepping from the rear seat looked nothing like Amara expected. No scars. No raised voice. No dramatic entrance. Director Cho looked elegant. Late 50s maybe, dressed in a dark navy overcoat with polished shoes untouched by the rain beneath the umbrella held carefully above him by another suited man. He smiled warmly as he approached, like an executive arriving for dinner instead of a betrayal. "Chairman Kong," Cho said calmly, stopping several feet away. "You survived." Min-jae did not move. Rain slid from his black coat while the city lights reflected coldly in his eyes. "You sound disappointed." Cho sighed softly, almost regretfully. "I sound tired." Nobody else in the alley dared speak. Even the guards loyal to Min-jae remained perfectly still, watching the two men with the kind of caution reserved for moments that change history. Amara stood near the seafood market wall, soaked by rain and overwhelmed by the realization that she was witnessing the collapse of something enormous. "Busan has become unstable," Cho continued quietly. "Too many divisions. Too many loyalists competing for your attention. I offered solutions for years." "You offered control," Min-jae corrected softly. Cho smiled faintly. "Sometimes control is the only thing preventing chaos." The rain intensified between them, but neither man moved beneath shelter. Amara watched Min-jae carefully then and finally understood why people feared him. It was not violence. It was presence. Even wounded and betrayed, he carried himself like the world still belonged to him. Cho's eyes suddenly shifted toward Amara. "And this must be the girl." Every guard in the alley immediately became more alert. Min-jae's expression hardened almost invisibly. "Do not involve her." Cho raised one hand lightly. "Relax, Chairman. I came to speak, not create more tragedy." The calmness in his voice unsettled Amara deeply. This entire world terrified her because nobody shouted. Nobody lost control. Men decided life-changing things with polite voices beneath expensive umbrellas. Cho looked toward her again. "Miss Brooks, do you know who this man truly is?" Amara swallowed hard but answered honestly. "I know enough." Cho gave a sad smile. "Then you know he cannot protect ordinary people forever. Eventually, everyone near powerful men becomes collateral." The words hit harder than she expected because part of her already feared they were true. But before she could respond, Min-jae spoke quietly beside her. "Leave." She looked at him. "What?" "Take the second car and leave this district." His voice remained calm, but she heard something underneath it now. Concern. Real concern. "What about you?" A strange silence followed that question. Min-jae looked toward the rain-covered street beyond the alley lights, eyes distant for a moment. This life was always going to collect its debts from me eventually. Han lowered his head slightly at those words while Cho's expression turned unreadable. Amara felt something twist painfully inside her chest then because for the first time tonight, Kong Min-jae did not sound like a king protecting his empire. He sounded like a tired man finally accepting the cost of it. She stepped closer before fear could stop her. "You told me kindness has consequences," she said softly. "Maybe so does mercy." Min-jae looked at her carefully then. Really looked at her. Rain dripping from dark hair. Eyes exhausted but steady. And for the first time since she found him bleeding behind the pharmacy, the coldness around him cracked completely. Not into weakness. Into humanity. Then slowly, almost disbelievingly, he smiled. Small. Brief. Real. The entire alley seemed to freeze around that expression because none of the men surrounding him had likely seen it in years. Cho noticed too. His smile faded slightly for the first time that night. And somewhere beneath the storm over Busan, Amara suddenly understood something nobody else in that alley had realized yet. The most dangerous thing she had done was not saving Kong Min-jae's life. It was reminding him he still had a soul.